Okay, so imagine this. You're at the gate boarding pass, ready for that vacation you've been looking forward to.
Mm.
But just as you're getting settled in, you find out you're on a Boeing 737 MAX 8.
Oh.
The same plane that was involved in not one but two really awful crashes just a couple months before your flight.
Wow, that's unsettling.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened to the host of the American Scandal podcast.
Huh.
It really sent him down a rabbit hole looking into these tragedies.
I bet.
And that's what we're going to do today.
Okay,
We're going to
yeah.
dig into what happened with Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302.
Sounds intense.
We're going to unpack some shocking details about this thing called the MCS system
Right.
and talk about the human costs of these crashes.
Well, what's really interesting to me is how these crashes went from like seemingly isolated things
Right.
to a worldwide crisis in aviation.
Yeah.
And it all starts with Lion Air Flight 610 and a woman named Garima Sati.
Okay,
Her husband, Bobik Suneja, was the pilot.
got it.
So it's October 29th, 2018. Garima's husband is flying this routine 90-minute flight. They had a tradition he'd call her when he landed.
Oh.
But that day,
Yeah.
instead of hearing from him, she gets a call from someone at Lion Air saying the plane vanished from radar.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine that?
I can't even imagine that terror.
Just awful. And then to add insult to injury, the media immediately blames budget airlines and says the pilot was inexperienced.
It's crazy because Garima knew right away that that wasn't true at all.
Right.
Her husband had almost 6,000 hours of flight time.
Wow.
It's a real reminder of how fast people jump to conclusions before they even have the facts.
Absolutely, especially with how news is these days. It's 24/7.
Yeah.
So while Garima is dealing with this horrible loss, investigators are trying to find the plane's black boxes.
Right.
And it was underwater. So really difficult conditions.
Really tough. And the data from those black boxes is what starts to unlock this whole mystery.
Oh, wow.
So the flight data recorder shows this malfunctioning secondhand angle of attack sensor.
Okay, so what is that?
It's this device that tells you the angle of the plane's nose,
Got it.
but it was sending bad data, making the plane think it was about to stall.
That's scary.
Yeah.
But don't planes have backup systems for when something like that happens?
You would think so.
Yeah.
And here's where the story takes a really disturbing turn.
Okay.
The data also showed something forcing the plane's nose down over and over,
Right.
even though the pilots were trying to pull it up.
So like the plane was fighting them?
Yeah, basically.
That's chilling. What could even cause that?
Nobody seemed to know at that point.
Huh?
Boeing and the FAA put out a safety alert warning pilots about this potential for losing a lot of altitude,
Okay.
but they don't explain why it's happening.
So then what?
So then we have Dennis Taser. He's a pilot with American Airlines
Okay.
and a spokesman for their pilots union.
Got it.
He gets this email from Boeing,
Okay.
and it mentions something called MCS.
MCSES.
Yeah, Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System.
And this pilot had never even heard of this.
It was a complete shock.
What is going on?
This system's supposed to prevent stalls,
Right.
but they basically hid it from the pilots.
Wow.
You wouldn't believe it. It was barely mentioned in the flight manual, like just one line in a huge glossary.
Seriously, they add this system that can overpower the pilots, and they don't even tell them about it.
Pretty much.
Unbelievable.
And then when Taser looks into it, he finds out that they have like 10 seconds to deactivate this MCS thing before it could cause a crash.
10 seconds.
Yeah. Can you imagine the outrage when the pilots found out about this?
Oh, yeah. I bet they felt betrayed.
Totally. The media was all over it wanting answers from Boeing, but instead of being transparent, their CEO just downplayed everything and made these comments about pilots not having enough experience.
That's bad. Just adding fuel to the fire.
Absolutely. And the worst part is those 737 MAX 8s, they were still flying.
Oh, no.
And just 5 months after that Lion Air crash, another one happened.
Oh, gosh.
Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302.
It's just awful to think about.
Yeah, this time there was a young woman on board. Her name was Samia Stumo.
Okay.
She was only 24, a public health worker on her way to Kenya for her dream job.
Wow.
She sent a message to her parents saying she was boarding. And then hours later, they wake up to this horrible news that a 737 MAX 8, the same flight Samia was on, had crashed.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean, after the Lion Air crash, you'd think everyone would have grounded those planes.
You would think so, right?
So what happened this time?
Well, China, they grounded all their MAX 8s right away.
Okay, good for them.
And then the European Union, Australia, Canada, India, pretty much everyone except the U.S.
The FAA was still letting those planes fly here after a second crash.
I know, it's crazy.
Why would they do that?
The head of the FAA said there wasn't enough proof to connect the two crashes,
Uh,
but then Boeing called him,
okay.
and they said their analysis showed the flight paths of both crashes were almost exactly the same.
Well, that seems like pretty strong evidence to me.
Right. I mean, identical flight patterns.
Yeah.
You got to think it's a problem with the plane itself.
Yeah, just some random things happening or pilot error.
Exactly. And that phone call with that information is what finally got the FAA to ground the MAX 8s here in the US.
So they grounded over 70 planes.
Yeah, it was huge. Really hurt Boeing's reputation.
So with the planes grounded, the real investigation could finally begin.
Mm.
Everyone wanted to know what the cockpit voice recorder from the Ethiopian Airlines crash said.
Remember Dennis Taser, the pilot who found out about MCS?
Yeah.
Well, he got a hold of that data, and it was
Wow.
chilling. You know, the co-pilot on that Ethiopian Airlines flight,
Mm.
he was young, but he did everything right. He
Right.
followed the runaway stabilizer checklist perfectly.
Wow.
Just what Boeing told pilots to do.
But it didn't work.
No, even though he did the checklist perfectly, that MCS system just kept forcing the nose down.
Oh my gosh.
It is devastating because it meant the pilots did everything they were supposed to,
Yep.
but the system itself was broken.
It wasn't pilot error at all.
It was a design flaw hidden in the plane's computer system that could take over from the pilots, and there's almost no time to react.
Makes you think, like, how could something like this even happen?
Right.
We put so much trust in these fancy systems, but then there's this hidden flaw that could be deadly.
Yeah. And to make it worse, it seems like Boeing tried to downplay the risks, and they didn't even train the pilots on how to deal with an MCS malfunction.
It really makes you question if they put profits ahead of safety.
Absolutely.
It's scary to think about.
Yeah, you have this incredibly advanced machine, but it feels like they forgot about the human element.
The pilots.
Yeah, the pilots, they're the ones who need these systems to work properly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what happened after these crashes? Did Boeing end up fixing the MCS?
Yeah, they had to. After all the investigations and the planes being grounded worldwide, they redesigned that MCS software.
Okay.
They added backups to prevent just one thing causing a failure and more safety measures.
Good.
And most importantly, they made sure all pilots got proper training on the system.
It's good to know they fixed it. But it's so sad that it took 2 horrible crashes and so many lives lost to make those changes happen.
Absolutely. This whole story is a huge reminder that we need transparency, accountability, and we have to put safety first.
Especially when we're talking about technology that people's lives depend on.
Exactly.
Well, we just scratched the surface of this whole thing today, but it's clear that those Boeing 737 MAX 8 crashes, they were more than just accidents.
Right.
They show us there are some big problems in the aviation industry, and we have to ask some tough questions about how much we can rely on technology versus human oversight.
For sure. If you want to learn more about this whole story, I'd recommend checking out the book Flying Blind by Peter Robinson.
Okay.
And there's a documentary too, Downfall, The Case Against Boeing. They both go into a lot more detail about everything that led up to these tragedies.
Great recommendations, and as always, we encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and never take your safety for granted.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another exploration of the world around us.